Hi, Gara. This is Kathy. Just want to let you know we have started the recording.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the May Helping Those Who Help Others series of webinars. And we're pleased to have Jeff Thompson as our presenter today on postvention. Before I introduce Jeff, just want to let folks know that we will be taking the next few months off at this point in terms of having organized webinars to share. If you want to mark your calendars for September 16th at noon, we're going to have a workshop on moral injury. We're going to have presenters looking at the topic of moral injury from the lens of working with law enforcement and working with active military and veterans. So that's September 16th. There's no registration link yet. As soon as we get that available, we will be sending it out to the listserv. And everybody is on mute. We encourage folks, if you have any questions as you're going through the workshop this morning or this afternoon, to use the chat function, and we'll be monitoring those. And we really encourage any questions or thoughts or reflections to be shared in the chat function. And with that, I'm going to introduce our presenter, Jeff Thompson, who's a PhD adjunct associate research scientist at the Molecular Imaging and Neuropathology Division in the Psychiatry Department at Columbia University Medical Center and New York State Psychiatric Institute. He also works on resilience in the Depression Center at Columbia as well. Dr. Thompson is also an 18-year veteran for detective, currently serving as the department's mental health and wellness coordinator. Additionally, Dr. Thompson is a recipient of the Griffith University's 2020 Outstanding International Alumnus Award and the New York City Police Foundation's 2020 Heimerdinger Award for Excellence for Distinguished Public Service. Jeff has put on a number of different symposiums in the past with amazing presenters and contents internationally for law enforcement, most recently the AWE Symposium. So some of you may have been able to listen in on that. So it is a great pleasure and honor to introduce Jeff, and he's going to be talking about postvention today. Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you. Honestly, it's an honor and privilege to be here and to share some of the insight that I've gained over the years of being involved in this and the brilliant people that I've worked with. I consider myself really fortunate. And it's that constant idea of, with the topic of all this, helping those who help others. We got to remember one thing I will say, and I have to say it every time I do anything like this. We got to make sure we're practicing what we preach. And if we're involved in some really tough work, the best way to try to help others is starting with ourselves. And that absolutely is not selfish. It's only smart. And it's something each and every one of us deserves. And so one thing I will invite everybody, I'm going to make sure at the end, we'll definitely have ample time for questions, hopefully for discussion. But that being said, please don't save it to the end. If you have any questions or comments or you want to share anything, please utilize the chat box at any time, because I know I'm going to try to monitor it as much as I can, as well as we'll have some people helping me out. So please, let's try and make this as interactive as possible. But that's really on everybody else and really all of you. And it's not going to be interactive if nobody writes anything in the chat box. So how about this? And I always love doing this. It's embracing the world of Zoom. Just write hello or something in the chat box, so I know at least people know how to use it. Otherwise, there we go. Thank you. At least there we go. Good. All right. So now I know you know how to be interactive. So when I ask questions later, you can't say you don't know where or what the chat box is. Maybe, Gara, we already broke the record for most messages post, and here we are only 3 minutes into this. Let's try to have some fun. And it's also not to minimize any of the discussions we have in any of these. It's also, again, it's heavy stuff, and we don't have to keep carrying this burden all alone. And it's good to be able to smile and share a smile with each other, even virtually through Zoom or through a chat box. So let's get on with this. So thank you again for the introduction. This is what I call my opening holding slide. So everybody, please get a look at it before I switch to the next slide. There we go. One thing in all seriousness, and I just like to remind everybody, we're talking about the topic of suicide and some of the information could potentially be triggering for some people. So I just want to put that out there, that it is sensitive. And I don't want to make this worse off on anybody. I try to follow all best practices, but also I don't know what place anybody's in at this moment. And if anybody is struggling right now, just know that you're not alone. And I truly mean that. And it goes back to that idea of looking after ourselves, because that's the best way that we can help others, is also beginning with ourselves. And that's something that we should do each and every day. Some of the key points that I'm going to look to be sharing with everyone today is the idea behind postvention. And again, that's the crux of the conversation here, is having qualified people. Having qualified people involved in the postvention efforts is critical. Another critical thing is collaboration. And I use these webinars as an example of creating opportunities for collaboration and realizing none of us have to figure this out on our own. And even if it's new for yourself and your organization, there's other people doing different things. And this is where what I'll quite often say, and even though it's my law enforcement background, hear me out, be a thief. Be a thief. This is metaphorically speaking, of course. Be a thief in a good way. When you hear or find something that another agency or group or organization is doing, take it. Nobody owns any of this stuff. Take it, but modify and adapt it to your organization and to the needs of the people that you're serving and your coworkers and your employees. There's nothing wrong with that, because there's a lot of people doing a lot of good stuff out there. So if you're trying to put something together or modify or adapt your approach, there's no reason to do it alone, and reach out to outsiders. So that's what I meant as far as the thief aspect. Hopefully that was clear. And then the last one, this one, they're all important, but I changed the color there to really grab your attention. Have a plan. How important having a plan is in postvention efforts. The other thing too is, I remind myself, if I was on the receiving end of any of this too, is this in part is kind of preaching to the choir. And good, we're all the choir, but sometimes it's also just important to re-emphasize things that come across as quote unquote common sense. Let's remind ourselves, here are the things we're doing. Let's remind ourselves, yeah, we got to have qualified people. Yeah, it's important to collaborate. Yes, it's important to have a plan. I'm like, yeah, tell me something I don't know. Let's use this as a reminder to make sure we're practicing what we preach. And for anybody out there that has a really well-established plan in place, ask yourself, when was the last time you gave an outsider an opportunity to look it over, to review it, to have a new set of eyes on it? When was the last time you collaborated maybe internally with another unit, another group? And how are you making sure maybe your qualified people are staying qualified and keeping their skills sharp? And this is an opportunity where we get what we put into this. And that's not just this webinar, it's everything. And it reminds me, although I've been involved in this for many years, to remind myself, I'm not at the top of the game. There is no top. And to constantly challenge myself and push myself, because again, I'm speaking on behalf of Columbia. I work in the NYPD as well. So I try and take some of my Columbia work and share it with the NYPD and other law enforcement agencies. But this isn't a law enforcement presentation. This isn't necessarily just only a first responder presentation. This is for everybody, no matter who you are or what you're involved in suicide prevention as well as postvention. The challenge to you, hopefully, as the person listening to this, is taking this and seeing how does this work in your setting? Because we are all truly different, but there are universal applications that can be utilized. Yet again, just maybe modifying it based on who you are and what your group is doing. So let's just think a little bit deeper. And the idea of, well, what do I mean by qualified people, that first point? And the idea of what are we talking about as far as qualified? How do we train our staff? How do we train our coworkers, our workforce? What are we doing to train them? And again, this is very, very much postvention, but let's look at it through the lens of making sure people understand suicidology. And how important it is understanding suicidology, understanding comms, communication. So like, for example, in my law enforcement role in the NYPD, I worked in our public information office. I also did a lot of work on internal comms. They're very, very different. And they can't be, okay, we have our comms plan. The comms plan very much needs to have a subset. It should be your subset here, internal and external. I like how, by the way, I am monitoring the chat box. Somebody sent me a private message. Should we introduce yourselves to the group? Yeah, go ahead, definitely. I see some people doing it. You don't have to, but why not? Because if we were all in person, we'd have those awesome name cards. but we don't have them. By all means, utilize the chat box, because how else can we learn or to begin to collaborate with each other unless we utilize the chat box and let people know who you are? Just please try to kind of listen to what I'm saying too as well. Multitask. I think you can handle it. Yeah, so understanding the comms, but also very importantly, understanding the distinct difference between internal and external. Is there overlap? Certainly, but there is clearly a difference between the two. Then understanding grief and bereavement, generally speaking, but also in terms specifically, the unique differences when someone's impacted by suicide and when somebody in your agency or your organization dies by suicide. And then the suicide prevention intervention. And what do we do in those situations? So let's dig a little bit deeper. What do we mean when we talk about understanding suicidology? And again, how easy is it to say, oh, yep, got it, Jeff, no worries. But no, not no worries. Yes, worries. Let's dig deeper and make sure how about this? Let me make this my first opportunity to make it interactive. If we're talking about creating a deeper understanding of suicidology, what are some of the most important things to make sure people know about? And you'll say, well, how much time do I have or how long? Don't worry about that. Just write in the chat box, what are the key most important things that people need to know in terms of suicidology? And I obviously, don't worry, I prepared my slides, but before I show what I have, let's compare it to what some of you have. So good, I see Bonnie, thoughts are common, but the actions aren't good, not a failure. Excellent, good. The commonality, yeah, more common than we might think. It can happen to anybody. Yeah, absolutely. And as more, please keep typing more. One of the things, again, looking at law enforcement as an example, suicide impacts everybody of all ranks in all agencies across the United States. And I do work with police in the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Unfortunately, suicide doesn't stop at a certain rank. In chiefs, unfortunately, inspectors, superintendents, we've all, and not just uniform, our civilian, what I call our professional workforce as well. It's not a sign of failure or weakness. Yeah. And how much that overlaps with dispelling myths that we're there for them. Carrie, definitely, I'm seeing that there's no single cause. Let's just show how Carrie and I are on the same page. Not that these are in any particular order, but absolutely, I have it on there. How important that is, one of the key things to point out to people right away. And the way I talk about that too is making sure that people are familiar with these suicidology terms and key concepts. People like to fit things into nice little neat boxes. They like to have it quote unquote solved or understandable right away. And we have to reminding people there is no single cause. And this is how importantly when somebody in your agency or organization does die by suicide, how plenty of people say things. And why do they say certain things? Because they're not educated. They don't know. And what people don't know, they don't know. So we have to ensure that people know this. And to counter that, the example I give, for example, with that is how often people say, oh, the reason he killed himself is because his wife left him. And again, let's just use law enforcement as an example. And say, well, hold on a second. If the reason that person took their life because their spouse left them, wouldn't we have hundreds, if not thousands, of dead members each year due to our high divorce to separation rate? And then it's that idea of reminding them there is no single cause. Could it have been part of what was going on in their life, causing them grief, stress? Yeah, sure, certainly. But that's not the reason. And it's creating that understanding, I think. And some of the other key terms that I think, it's making sure people understand that hopelessness, helplessness, right? And as much as they sound the same, they are similar, but they also have distinct differences. The hopelessness, thinking things will never get better, and the helplessness, nobody can do anything. And what does that create? That sense, that deep, awful, dark sense of feeling isolated, alone. I see, as Michelle wrote in there too, people missing the signs. Yeah, I want to touch on that as well. Psychic. And one of the things when we talk about collaborate, a video that I use all the time is the many incredible videos. And this is one of many shout outs I'm going to give to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Their videos are phenomenal on YouTube. And I highly recommend people check out their videos. But sometimes it's the messenger, not the message. And especially if you're the messenger creating the message in your agency, sometimes you just don't click with people. And don't take that personal. I know sometimes maybe I don't. Maybe it's my hairdo. I'm not changing my hairdo. It's been like this for over 20 years. But for whatever reason, we've got to be okay with that. Check our egos at the door and realizing sometimes we need to mix up the messenger. And that's why I find utilizing the AFSP videos and talking about that unbearable psychological pain and suffering and helping people better understand what a 2 or 3 minute video is, I've found to be incredibly, incredibly effective as part of the post-vention and even prevention and training efforts. Let's see. And I'm just looking at some of the other statements in there. Good. I see Gary's being my teammate again, as always, posting the direct link to the videos. I couldn't recommend it enough how wonderful those videos are. The cognitive constriction, and this is where we talk about, again, there's a lot of people that might be down and out in the dumps, not doing so well, but then what happens, how the trajectory changes with the suicidal mind. Again, I'm just thinking of one of those videos where all of a sudden they feel like there's no options, or there's only one option to try to get out of that pain and suffering that they're experiencing, and utilizing that term cognitive constriction. The impact of impulsivity, I think, is important. Here's the thing with burdensome too. And I think about the great work by Tom Joyner, Florida State, and others, the idea of normalizing how people feel after somebody close to them dies by suicide, and normalizing it and letting them know it's okay to feel X, Y, or Z. But it's also trying to create that deeper understanding of it's okay to be angry and thinking maybe that why was that person selfish, but also trying to help people see that that person most likely was thinking differently and thinking the exact opposite. Now, here's yet again, and I'll put one more up there, ambivalence. This is where I take a quick time out and I remind myself, I look at this and how easy is it just to say, Jeff, yeah, I get it. We know this stuff. This is suicidology 101. It is to us. But to many people out there that aren't trained in this, this is pretty mind-blowing stuff. This is hardcore education for them, and making sure people are aware of this stuff. This is the difference. This is what helps bring people more on our advocacy side compared to people, A, not knowing, and then people saying some pretty silly or unfortunate things because they're not trained in this. And these are just some of those key terms of making sure people understand at least a little bit more than maybe they did the day before. And as part of, again, the post-vention effort, this is what creates a better understanding and counters some of the myths that could arguably make things worse for your organization, and especially for people that are struggling in that moment. I want to check in. What do we think of this list so far? I'm also going to take my first sip of my lukewarm coffee. We could have some awkward silence if you guys like, but maybe just throw in the chat box any thoughts or comments on that. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. Thank you. Some people like the list. So on that positive note, I think I'm going to keep moving along. The other thing, though, too, with this list is the idea of reminding ourselves and sharpening our own skill box and realizing how do we make sure we're helping people. And everything's not going to be ideal, and training won't be ideal. And maybe we can't hit everyone with every single one of those dot points, but maybe which ones do we do at different days and different times. The other key thing too, which leads me into my next slide, is the communications aspect, the internal and external, and following some pretty substantial best practices from a variety of places. Yet again, AFSP, American Association of Suicidology, who I also work very closely with, the Reporting on Suicide website, reportingонsuicide.org. Here's my really, really important thing that I want to share with everybody. And if you have a role, and especially a leadership role, as part of your prevention and post-vention efforts, getting people to report or use the right terminology, that's not enough. And this is where people want to argue with me. Here's your opportunity to argue with me. I don't think that's not enough. And that's where I'd say it doesn't stick. And then what happens is we got to do the same damn thing over again the next time if we have somebody die by suicide. Just saying, here, follow this sheet that's on here and don't say this and not say that. Or look, just make sure you say it this way. That's not long-term thinking. That's just trying to plug one hole. And what do I mean by that? You still need to do that, but it's the idea of explaining why, explaining the do's and the don'ts, and explaining why it could be misinterpreted and why it's so important that we try to avoid committed suicide. Even if somebody says, oh, well, committed suicide, come on, Is that really serious? Yes, it is. To some people, take it very serious. So if you know you could potentially be offending or hurting people, why don't we avoid that? Again, just from my background, the example I like to give a lot for anybody involved in law enforcement, or even if you're not involved in law enforcement, what I always say is, quote unquote, back in the day, when two vehicles did this, what would we call it? A vehicle what? And I know this takes a bit longer trying to get somebody to answer in the chat box. Otherwise, just know if we were in person, I would have called on one of you randomly. We call it a collision now. What did we used to call it? Accident. Yeah, there we go. Good stuff. Crash. Head on. Right. So what I'm looking at, we used to call it a car accident, right? Police are responding to a car accident. You call 911 asking for the police or an ambulance saying I had a car accident. Now, let's not get caught up in the terminology, but what is the term used now? A collision, as the first person wrote. I don't remember who that was. We call them collision. And back then, I remember like, oh, come on. Are we just changing this around, or what are we saying? If we can change our terminology and the language we use to go from car accident to car collision or vehicle collision, how about we can definitely do it with how we report on suicide, especially in a certain sense, how much more serious it is and how it could, depending on our terminology, we could either make sure it's helpful language, especially to people vulnerable in that moment, reading or listening or watching, or it can possibly be detrimental to them. And this is where I say to people too, honestly, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not arguing with you. Just know that best practices say avoid saying committed. And I'd say, honestly, at the moment, it doesn't matter what your thoughts are anymore. If we're using comms internally and externally, we're not using it. And that's what I've said to people. Don't use it. Or if you're asking me, like in my consultant role with other groups and organizations, I'd say, well, I'm consulting. I'm telling you, very rarely do I say do this or don't do that. This is one of those things. Try your best. Is it the end of the world? Is it catastrophic? No, not necessarily. It's just a work in progress, I think. And this is where one of those things are where people, oh, you're nitpicking. No, this is our specialty. And that's why I remind people, please, at least, I'm not calling myself an expert, but I'm saying I've got some background in this, as do many of you, a lot more than me, saying, hey, well, you're asking me for my insight. This is my insight. Take my word for it. If not, and this is why I'd say the power is, here's some resources. If you don't believe me, read them here. Yeah, the World Health Organization definitely has a great booklet, I guess you can call it, handout, pamphlet, PDF, I guess use whatever term, but yeah, theirs is very good. The one you're looking at is one that I created in collaboration with a few other groups. It's not limited to law enforcement. We call it a cheat sheet. If anybody wants it, I'll make sure I give it along with the slides as part of a handout for anybody that does want it. If not, no offense taken. Okay, moving along then. And again, let me just emphasize one more time. It's the knowing why we're doing this, not just trying to help our coworkers and especially the people above us, the leadership in our organizations. It's not just guiding them on best practices. It's also guiding them on understanding why. So that we don't have to start at step one every single time in the unfortunate situations when somebody does die by suicide. And then it feels like Groundhog Day every day over and over again. With the grief, and that is a specialty training, isn't it? But also understanding specific to suicide. And who do we rely on? Our experts, internal, external. How about chaplains, right? We also have who? Peer support. And how vital peer support is as part of the postvention efforts, especially with the grief and in the immediate aftermath, somebody dies by suicide. But here's the other thing too. And I've seen in law enforcement, first responders, like with EMS, and even in the medical field too, let's not oversell peer support. If you're trying to sell to your organization, let's institute peer support or let's expand it. If you have somebody die by suicide, your peer support program did not fail. And let's be realistic with the expectations of peer support as well. And I know sometimes like in an agency, they'll say, oh, we just trained them in peer support, or we have 10 new peer support members, or we had somebody working in that district or in that place or in that hospital. What happened? Well, what happened is it doesn't mean they failed or they did something wrong. And it's, again, it's setting those expectations. And I know the peer support is highly recommended in many, many best practices, but let's, again, not oversell our expectations, because if suicide, again, let's look at it in that context. If there's no single cause to suicide, therefore suicide's complex, our approach and postvention, as well as our prevention efforts, have to be equally complex and diverse, if not more so. And then let's see, the other one, utilizing great groups again. Like, by the way, I get nothing each time I say AFSP, so there is no like royalties of me saying this, but it's also me relying on them and the great work that they do and how they have their programs. And again, in New York State, I know it's not only the state chapters, we have them in different areas. And even if you're in an area where you don't have a local chapter, reach out to one of the other chapters and how they do grief and bereavement, or they can guide you and give you suggestions on it, as well as, again, groups like AAS. And even if you aren't here and you're familiar with them and what they are doing, challenge yourself. Have a look again, see what they're doing, and see how you can use it maybe in your organization or your agency. All right. The pre and intervention. So prevention and intervention. This goes back to, again, knowing what to say, how to say it, how to intervene, and then also how to get help. So this is where, again, the lines get blurred between prevention, intervention, and postvention. It's who cares, and honestly, who the hell cares what terminology you're using? But if somebody just died by suicide, fine, call it postvention. But it's also really, it's identical to what your prevention and your intervention stuff is, knowing what to say, how to say it. And this is where, as great as each and every one of you are, you can't be everywhere at all times. Don't put that burden on yourself. So it's making sure you have allies, people supporting you in that effort, and making sure that, as bad as silence might be, saying the wrong thing sometimes is worse, or just worse in a different way. And this has to be part of that, your postvention efforts. And how do we engage people? Also, though, how do we make sure the right people are being reached out to? Because, of course, your organization or your agency is impacted across the board, but people are impacted differently. And for example, maybe the people that work in that unit or that subunit, are we giving them help and care and support? That should definitely look different. So it's not a flat across the board, here's what we're doing as an agency. That's where somebody like me, if you reached out to me, okay, well, that guy worked in, or that woman worked in finance. What are we doing specifically for finance? Because what you're doing, say, for the vice presidents or what have you, or the supervisors, well, that's different. Or your agency message, yeah, that's important, to blanket wide message. But what are we doing for those people that worked every day with that man or that woman? That clearly deserves something different. And then what is it? Instead of saying, oh, great point. Okay, yeah, great point. So let's talk about it. What exactly is that plan? Let me just take a quick moment there and check in with everybody. And does anyone, at least at this moment, and this truly is, yeah, I'm the guy talking. I'm the guy that prepared for this. Trust me, I did prepare for this. I hope you feel like I have so far. But you guys know, and when I say guys, I mean women too. It's just, I condense some of the words I'm saying here. You all are experts in this too. You all have wonderful postvention plans. How about people, type in right now, what's one of your number one recommendations that somebody should have in the postvention? And let's see if any jump out there that we can further discuss, because it's not just all about me sharing this. We're all in this together. We have, I think, we have over 100 people here. That's pretty substantial to me. It's a suicide prevention training, right? I like the mental health first aid, the immediate support, the listening, being there. And Nola, let's just jump on that. And this is where, and I know it's on one of my slides later too, but being there, people untrained in this, they're not very good at being there for people sometimes. And what do they do with the silence? They become awkward. It becomes awkward for the silence. So what do people untrained in this do this when they're trying to provide support? They feel that silence. Why? Who's it awkward for? It's awkward for them. But who's it supposed to be all about? The person you're supporting. And that's why the training is critical. But even I saw somebody talked about that, the training. Imagine this, where we talk about when good things go bad. When things go bad, what happens? Imagine after somebody in your agency died by suicide, and within that month, they say, all right, we're going to send 25 of you to mental health first aid. What is a potential negative pushback from that? Amy, I see your hand is raised. I think for this webinar, I don't think you have the ability to talk or your video. So I'm just going to say, if you can, please just throw it in the chat box, if that's okay. Garrett, let me know. I think I was right with that as well. Yeah, good. I'm looking at it where Carrie again saying it's too late. Don't be an overly bubbly. Yeah. So what I was looking for as far as with that training aspect, how easy is it for people to be cynical? And I'm not judging, and I'm not saying that even negative. I'm just like, yeah, oh, great. Now that so-and-so died, now they're going to start giving us mental health first aid. And how do we handle that? And this is where, again, I challenge all of you. How do you handle it? You better have a plan, right? Someone said, just another training, right? Or what I say, like checkbox training. Yep, they're just trying to CYA. This is where we come in. I think, yeah, maybe someone is thinking that. I'm not going to argue with people, but I always say this is all about perspective. And from the world of psychology, the term in the world of resilience, cognitive reappraisal. I don't know if I'm trying to institute this in an agency. Well, I'm not sure, but they brought me in, and I know I'm not part of checkbox training mentality. And I'm saying we can't change the past, what happened. But what we got to do is try to prevent it from ever happening again. And by doing mental health first aid training, this is going to create better understanding. And all I know is this is the kind of stuff that works and helps us better understand what mental health conditions, helps us better understand suicide for who? Us. And then it helps us better look after those signs in other people. And that's why I say to people, and I say to you, who wants to argue that? Really, with so much out there that we can argue, is this really one of the things? So I don't know that checkbox mentality, but not for me, not when I train it. I'm a trainer in mental health first aid. And that's where I'd say, let's meet that kind of stuff head on. Is it okay for people to be cynical? Absolutely. But all I know is where we get to say, we're not part of that. We're not talking for any other people. We're talking for ourselves and the work that we're involved in and the work that we're doing. And even if it is something new, okay, something good can come out of something bad. We can learn more. What can we do differently? Because again, there is no perfect post-vention plan. It's always got to be adapting. Let's see, we have staffing so people can take time off and not feel like they're burdening others. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, how to help people, the hotlines, the warm lines. Good. One thing I'll say with the hotlines and the warm line, something that I promote a lot, and I also am a volunteer crisis counselor with them, crisis text line. And I think we came up with a pretty cool logo that promotes that. I'm using the keyword blue for law enforcement across the country. I'm very biased. I helped create the logo. So let me put that disclaimer out there. But even if people are never going to use crisis text line, the mindset that we had behind creating the logo, at least, it's catchy. It gets people's attention. And I say, fine, you're never going to use it, but you just looked at it. But also, we know statistics, every one of us, right? Let's talk about stats. More people generally, not even in crisis, if more people generally are more comfortable texting than calling, maybe some people are more comfortable texting than calling when they're in a personal crisis. And yet again, it's all about those options. And I don't know about any of you, I prefer people texting me than calling too. And I'll ask sometimes, for those of you on here that know me, if you call me, I'm like, well, why are you calling me? Couldn't you just text me that? And don't worry, I like hearing people's voices too. Still feel free to call me. It's just being reasonable and helping people where they're at. And yet again, as part of our postvention, this is the kicker. And it's that last dot point I have on there, how to get help. I'm not in the business of telling people what to do. I'm in the business of options. I'm in the business of empowering people, because who better knows how to handle their crisis than that person themselves? And again, from the world of crisis text line, their line, and I checked with them, they don't have trademark to it. They don't own the line. I asked, getting people from a hot moment to a cooler calm. Absolutely. Is it okay for people to be in a bad spot after somebody dies by suicide? Absolutely. Let's normalize that. But let's remind them, hey, they're not alone either, that there's help, and importantly, there's options. So I'm not going to tell people use crisis text line. I'm not going to tell people call the hotline. I'm going to say, hey, you got options. Here's a couple of them. Only you know which one's best for you. Just know you're not alone. And there's people out there to help, including me. And I feel like, look, that's only fair too. Getting from, yeah, well, you can steal it because I kind of stole it from them. So I'm looking in the chat box. I use it in all my presentations. And, you know, as a sidebar to that, I remind when our peer support members, if there's peer support in an agency or, you know, an organization going out to help, I remind them, unless it needs immediate intervention, that's your job. No more, no less. Checking in on people and then getting them from their hot moment to a cool calm, and then maybe follow up with them later or a day or two just to see how they're doing. And don't put that burden on yourself thinking you got to fix or solve their problems. All right, so let's talk about have a plan. The best prevention, the best postvention is prevention, right? I wish I can say take two. I throw that up there because, yeah, it can be a cheesy catchphrase. Yeah, of course. But also remember, one of the reasons I put that up there is let's not get fixated or caught up on our terminology either. Most people don't care about the terminology outside our circle of 100 and whatever people in here. Terminology is terminology for geeks like us. Let's just call it we're doing our outreach or we're doing our engagement. But also realizing it's overlapping. The prevention, well, then when does it stop being postvention? And then when does it just become prevention? Who knows? Who cares to a certain degree? Let's just keep doing our work, but let's also make sure we're doing it specific and strategic after somebody does die by suicide. And that's the point I'm trying to make with that. The other one I have up here, the best plan, sorry, not sorry. Don't try and figure it out right after. Why? Why put yourself behind the eight ball? Why add that pressure to yourself too? And this is where being strategic is constantly planning and preparing for a variety of things. And I'm sure everybody on here, you have a lot of jobs, you wear a lot of hats. And this is one of them. Make sure you dust or you take the dust off of your plan, review it. Make sure, especially what if there's turnover in your staff, making sure that they're familiar with this stuff as well. And that's the idea of constantly checking it. Have the plan beforehand, because here, again, one of the lines I use frequently, and somebody taught it to me, is we have knowledge and skills with the work that we do. Absolutely. And the way I show it sometimes in my slides is knowledge, skills, and then the word that comes after it. Let me tell you the word that shouldn't come after it, especially with our postvention efforts. And I hear people use this term in different aspects, in different arenas. People that use this term wing it. No way. That should be removed from all of our vocabulary, especially in our postvention efforts. We can't afford to wing it, especially when it comes to suicide postvention. No way. Because what am I hearing when somebody uses that term wing it? They have no plan. They don't care to have a plan, really. And they think, we're going to figure it out as we go. That's not professional. That's not what we do in our line of work. We need to have that plan. The term, though, that people should be using is, it's not necessarily a cookie cut design every single time. Do we have a framework? Absolutely. But what also do we need to do with all of our knowledge and skills? Sometimes we need to adapt our approach, because we don't want to say, and again, our communications plan, we don't want it seeming like a canned message, because guess what? A canned message is going to sound like a what? Canned message. And that's going to push people back. And that's only going to further increase that cynicism. Let's see. I have a bunch of more slides. I know I'll have time to cover them all, but how about we take a quick pause? We're not going to a commercial break. There are no commercial breaks. But let's just see. Does anybody have any questions, any comments? Anybody want to share anything? And Garrett, I don't know if I did miss any questions in there. If there were, please jump in, let me know.
I haven't seen anything that you haven't already spoken to, so I think we are up to date.
Yeah. How am I doing so far? What do you think?
Fantastic. I've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please jump in. We all need a little self-reassurance every now and then too. And again, this is what I'd say, like Gary and I, we've talked before plenty of times. Please don't misunderstand my approach here too. But sometimes I say it at the very end. I kind of said in the beginning, we deal with some really heavy stuff. And being able to smile and have a joke or a laugh, I'm not minimizing any of this tough, awful work we're involved in. It's super heavy, but it's good to know when we're in our safe communities and our safe groups, it's okay to make a bad joke. And if somebody laughs, that's okay too, because resilience, man, I tell you, we all need it. And we need to practice what we preach. And it's sometimes me trying to make a bad joke and maybe 2 out of 20 of you laugh. I don't know. Anyway, Gary, go ahead, brother.
Well, no, that is so important. We all have to come up for air, right?
Yeah, which I need to take a breath right now because I just had a really long sentence.
Just a couple of questions I had, Jeff. One is, are there anything from your experience that community providers, civilians can do to offer support from a postvention perspective in the event of a suicide by uniformed personnel, be it law enforcement, fire, EMS? and I guess part two was, are there, or in your experience, what are some unique postvention activation considerations for uniformed personnel versus in the civilian world?
Great questions. And by the way, everybody, I want you to know he didn't give me these questions beforehand, so he's got me on my toes here. Good job. I should have asked you what were the questions you're going to ask me, but too late now. Okay, so let's start with the first one. Whether it's law enforcement, first responders, honestly, I think it's anyone, but I'd say from the law enforcement world, if I put that hat on, and I'm not trying to be a jerk either, don't come up to me. Don't reach out to me after we've had one, or if we've had seemingly a cluster, or even worse, a contagion. We've got so much going on. And this is where I'd say I'm not being a jerk. I get some really, really, heartfelt emails and messages of people saying, we're so sorry. Is there anything we can do? We're here to help. And I try to respond to everyone. Thank you so much. And it truly does mean a lot to hear from people. But here's my thing. Work on that preventative or that postvention beforehand. Let's make friends with each other, especially in law enforcement beforehand. Yeah, it's kind of cold calling. Let people know who you are before that moment comes up. And don't get me wrong, too. Doing it afterwards, something's better than nothing. And many agencies will say, yeah, we do need the help. Or, hey, do you have time for a quick phone call? Here's what we're thinking. Or, yeah, I'm not really sure, like if it's a PIO. And people might say, look, I'm not really sure what to say or what not to say. Can you help me out here? And can we do this like off the record as an aside? Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Do that outreach, but try to do it beforehand. And this is what I say, too, with everything going on in the world, especially this past year, some police have done awful things, right? I'm not here to be an apologist or defend policing, but we're also human. Some police have done bad acts. Yes, absolutely. Are all police bad? No way. Not even maybe. And as we try to make changes, we all have to be part of the narrative. And I don't like to see some people out there dehumanizing us as policing. We're police agencies, police organizations are made up of human beings. And we've got to make sure we're helping them as much as we can. Because here again, I challenge anybody. If you want to argue with me, okay, let me just finish this last statement. If we're looking after our police, especially in a postvention setting, we're helping them with their mental health, right? Hear me out. We're helping them with their mental health, yes. And that's going to make them what? Be better human beings. But also they wear a uniform. That's going to make them be better what? Police. And what happens with police? What are police supposed to do? Protect all of us. This is more than that cliche win-win. And now, does that fix or change any of the changes that need to be made? No, but there is no one quick fix. It's very complicated. And in the postvention effort and just the overall outreach, every single person deserves positive mental health in all communities, including policing. And that's where I wrote it, Gary. I truly mean it. That moral injury, that's something I highly recommend. And I'm not sure who your speakers are, but I highly recommend everybody tune into that one because that is incredibly important. But that's a different topic for September. Bringing us back. Your second question was, and again, if anybody has comments, please, I'm open to everything. And I'm not here to try and create arguments. I'm also here trying to be upfront. And sometimes it is okay to not necessarily agree 100% with me or with anybody else, but let's also be fair and realistic. Find one person in your life that you do agree 100% with them on. And this is the other thing that we did talk about pre-webinar too, and a reminder to myself. And again, it's somewhere in my slides, but who the hell cares? Let me say it now because it popped into my head. Let's be fair to ourselves with our postvention efforts. You think you can have the perfect postvention game plan on paper, or on digital paper in PDF, and you very well could, but also keep in mind, very rarely ever does a perfect plan go to plan. And be fair to yourself saying, hey, maybe I've got to be okay with this is good enough, or we hit most of the points. Don't beat yourself up if things don't go exactly, because that's not fair to you. And it's being realistic. Have the game plan, have the framework, try to institute it as best as possible, realizing you have to modify and adapt it. And there might be some things that didn't go the way you wanted, but that's where you see me later saying too, make sure you do a debrief. Again, though more specific to your question, I am going to go into it in one of my later slides. It's that idea of the psych autopsy, it having a specific one for law enforcement. But let me jump ahead here. I'm being mindful of our time here. So the plan, immediate, recent, long-term. Let's dig a little bit deeper into that. The immediate, what are we talking about? Acknowledging the suicide. This person doesn't disappear if they died by suicide from existence. It's not like, what was it? The Moses movie, right? Where they let them be stricken from the record. No, the person existed. And in the law enforcement context, they were a fallen brother or sister that died by suicide. They served our great city. They served our great agency. But this is where the proper reporting, we don't ever want anybody thinking suicide is an acceptable option. No. So that's where we make sure we offer support and advice and let people know. We don't want people dying by suicide, but we also don't ever forget their service to the city. And we will always, always remember them. We will always remember them and the great work that they did. Offering support is the other key thing to people impacted. And I already said this earlier. Support comes in all different fashions because people are impacted differently. And we can't forget that family. We can't forget that person's family. Yeah, maybe this person was the employee, but don't forget they have a family too, and not isolating them or forgetting them and offering whatever kind of help and support we can, because that's critical too, because they're going to have all different feelings and emotions too. And being there for them, I think, is something we can't look. Then what happens initially afterwards? Adjusting the outreach. So if you're doing a whole lot of outreach initially afterwards, that's not sustainable either. How do you modify it and adjust it? Importantly, do you do psychoautopsies? Are you familiar with them? Do you have people trained in them? And there's all different kinds of training. I'll dig a little bit deeper into that in a second. But then also the check-ins. I'm reminding people like how we do with some of the peer support programs that I've helped organizations with. It's simple. Let's not make it complicated. Asking people how they're doing. Asking them how they're doing, listening to them. You know, that's that whole idea. Actually, if you're going to ask, how about you actually listen? Encourage people to get more help if they need it. And we know the people that have been involved in this business for a long time, the asking and listening quite often is just what people need. Sometimes people need a bit more, that's fine. And then we also talk about the follow-up. Show you actually do give a damn, right? Don't say, hey, I'm just running through my checklist. I'm doing the asking, listening, and encourage. No, follow up. Say, hey, look, I know I checked in with you the other day or yesterday or this morning. I just wanted to say it again. I really meant it. I'm here if you need anybody. And if it's not me, that's okay. Just reach out to somebody if you're having a hard time. Because just because you're okay to check in with them, they might not be ready to open up that first time. So maybe that second time they will. And that doesn't always have to be face-to-face, right? Let's adapt with our settings. Sometimes maybe it is email. Maybe it's a phone call. Maybe it's a text message and being able to adapt. So psychoautopsy, what is that? That's for another day, another presentation. But psychoautopsy is a scientific procedure, a protocol that answers these questions as best to the ability. Why suicide? Why did that person die by suicide? Why by those means? Why that day? So if somebody was in a bad spot for days, weeks, months, or years, why that day? And why didn't the protective factors, the good things going on in their life, counter their thoughts of suicide or that acting out of the suicide? Then importantly, the psychoautopsy has recommendations. What can we do? What did we learn from this? So I'm very fortunate. And again, there's different versions out there, but I work very closely with AAS, the American Association of Suicidology. And through some of the work I do at Columbia, I developed a law enforcement specific one. And that's where you ask, Garrett, getting back to that, is a specific one designed for law enforcement based on the AAS one. And it's really, honestly, I'd say it's not just for law enforcement. It's a tightened version that law enforcement would expect how to see their reports, or to develop that way and produced in that way. Also to get important information out quickly and broken up into 13 points, 13 topic areas that need to be covered. And the 13th one is recommendations. And I'll tell you, almost every time, one of those number one recommendations is making sure and increasing our ability to make sure people are aware of the signs. Make sure they're aware of the signs of suicide, risk factors, warning signs. And this is never to blame people for something that happened in the past, because we can't change that, but it's going forward. And not only just knowing the signs, what to do if you see them. And now putting that burden on people, letting them know if you don't know what to do, that's why we're here. That's that idea of collaboration again. Reach out to us. Just don't do nothing. Well, that was a double negative, but you got what I meant there. For I see someone right. If anyone's interested in the law enforcement psych autopsies or just psych autopsies in general, like I said, different groups do them. But if you want, go to the AAS, the suicidology.org, and they talk about both of them. Gary, I think you were jumping in.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to point out there was a question from Carol in the Caroline, in the chat about how to address police officers' concerns if they're feeling suicidal, sort of the confidentiality, negative career consequences, et cetera.
Yeah. And this is where I'd say, back to the great training that I had, some really awesome people. This is where I'd say, and I'm not saying this as a cliche or anything, truly, what is the only moment that exists? This moment. And if somebody's in crisis, quite often what we teach and train people, and the way I practice it is, well, hold on a second. And I'd say, look, what you shared with me, you got X, Y, and Z going on in your life. And now you're wondering what's going to happen to your career. Let's just help you right now in this moment. Let's make sure you're okay, because I don't want you to die. I don't. And I want to help you right now. And how about we just take it one step at a time? Because trying to figure out what's going to happen tomorrow, the day after that, that's just going to cause more stress and anxiety for you. And that's the last thing I want to do for you. Let's just work on in this moment at this time. Right. And keep it as Gary, keep them safe for now. And it's sort of like kicking the can down the block a little bit. Yeah, because who knows? And this is the other thing too, Caroline. And I say this, and fortunately, like I've done work with like PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, and the Fraternal Order of Police, and the great people that work there as well. It's that idea of, hey, how do we fight stigma in policing? Well, first of all, let's say people aren't in trouble. Let's stop saying they're in trouble if they had their gun taken away because they might have been suicidal or they have a mental health condition. That's not in trouble. That's what bravery is. That's what smart is. So we need to make sure our terminology is being used right. And just because someone had their gun taken away, it doesn't make them any weaker or less of a human being, less of a man or woman. To me, I say that's what real strength is. They were going through a hard time and they reached out to get help, and they are getting help. That's what real strength is. And then also saying, well, how many people get their guns back if they get help? Well, okay, I can give you the stats, but also just think about it. Maybe some people need extra care and support, and maybe they shouldn't get their firearm back. And that's okay too, isn't it? And this is where I phrase it as questions to people, get them to think about it. And that's why I'd say yet again, I overview, do we want to argue this? I'm not ruining people's career, because I say, well, hold on a second. Let's think of the alternative. And the police terminology we use is jamming up. I got that guy jammed up because he's in the hospital and he had his gun taken away. So, well, hold on a second. He was suicidal. You're telling me we should do what? Nothing? And leave a suicidal cop in possession of their firearm? And that's it. Come on. How does that make sense? No way. We have more cops. Here's one stat for everybody here. More cops across the country, according to Blue Help, another awesome organization. If you're writing them down, please go to their website, check them out. Blue Help. According to their stats, the last 4 years, more cops in the United States have died by suicide compared to being killed in the line of duty. Let me say that again. I'll slightly rephrase it. Cops are killing themselves more than the bad guys are killing them. That is awful. That is absolutely awful. And this is where I say everybody, when I talk to the law enforcement community, every one of us has an opportunity to help fight that. And one of the key things is countering that stigma of somebody getting help and calling that a sign of weakness. That's old, awful, old school thinking. We don't have a place for that anymore. No way. Were there any other questions, Gary, in there? I'll take some more questions. I only have a couple more slides, I think. I think 2.5 slides. And I'm not even sure what a half a slide is. I just like saying 2.5.
Half a slide is better than no slide. I think about being interested in taking the training.
Which training is that?
The psych autopsy training.
Oh, yeah. Again, if people are interested, have a look. I just don't want it coming across as a sale pitch. I help teach it and train it. So you get a lot more of me, whether you like it or not. If you're not liking me, then don't take the training if I'm the one teaching it. The regular psych autopsy is done by Ramya, and she's just fantastic. Such a knowledgeable woman. She's the one that trained me in the general psych autopsy and how I got certified through her. And she's just a phenomenal person. And I say, Gary, put in there Red Help too. Blue Help now also has Red Help for firefighters too, which is incredibly important as well. And the thing with the psych autopsy is don't let limitations or restrictions of your agency prevent it. There's a whole cadre of certified psych autopsy investigators Or even if you're not going to be able to do the official psych autopsy, it's going to help you ask the right questions. But then it could also help you help the people that are in charge of looking into it or investigating it. And the more we know, the more understanding we have, a deeper insight into, and this is, let me be clear too, the psych autopsy, I say that if it's a law enforcement member, we owe it to that fallen brother or sister to learn as much as we can, don't we? But then also look at it beyond the individual. If you do that with more than one incident, then you start collecting important data. And what do you do with that data from your post-vention work, including the psych autopsy? That builds your prevention outreach, right? Think about it. And that makes it data-driven, data-informed. And that's where it's cyclic and all interconnected. Absolutely, absolutely. I know we've got some time left, but let me just talk here. So the long-term plan, and this is where then it becomes, is it post-vention or back to prevention? Be strategic. Here's the thing, and I wrote a note for me to stay here too, is clusters and contagion. Some data I've looked at in certain agencies or organizations, there's a difference between clusters and contagion, first of all. Contagion means if somebody died by suicide and then somebody else dies by suicide because there's some sort of connection between them or because of them knowing that person or what have you. That's what contagion is. Cluster is just statistically. Look at your stats. If somebody dies by suicide, what are the statistics on when the next person dies by suicide? Even if there is no direct connection, that should be guiding and informing your outreach. So let's just say, for example, with some work in agencies that I've done outside New York City, and if somebody has, after in their agency, if somebody died by suicide, the odds are just statistically speaking, another person will die by suicide in that agency within 60 days. Well, then what the hell is our 60-day plan? And then even after that, that's where it's got to be data driven instead of just saying, here's our plan. Okay, somebody like me would say, as nice as possible, what led to that plan being developed? Why is it set up that way? And I'm not questioning it, saying it's wrong. I just want to understand the insight behind it. And that's the idea of having, say, a 5-day plan, a 15-day plan, and then your 30 and 60. No matter who you are, your agency, or if you have very few, which is a good thing, of suicide, so you don't really have the data. How about that 5-day, 2-week, month, 2 months? And this is how then you have it mapped out. And of course you adapt and modify it too, but at least you have a framework. I don't know, that only makes sense to me. Let's see. Adapt, I just said that. Reconvene, this is also kind of my recap slide too. Reconvene, that's another thing too. Like in some like law enforcement or even FD does it as well in special ops, they call it like a hot wash or debrief. Do your debrief. Here's what we laid out. Did it go according to plan? And just because some stuff didn't go according to plan, maybe that was good and it should become part of the next time we have to do a post-vention. But it's the idea of making sure we're learning from it and getting together. And this is where also, really, let's not sugarcoat this either. This is about accountability too. This was in the plan. Did we do it? If not, what happened? Why didn't we do this? Is there a valid reason or not? And then again, the preliminary, the way I recommend people in agencies, law enforcement, first responders, anybody, have a preliminary psych autopsy report and then the proper one, long-term, that when they do the full in-depth one, but trying to gather data preliminarily within a week or 2 weeks. What do we know so far? Why? That helps us what we need to find out more so of and where to dig deeper and what to get that we don't have. I want to open it up to discussion, comments, questions. Before I throw it to Garrett and everybody else, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. And I was going through the names on there. Some of you on here we've never met. And I just want you to know that you've helped me because I know your name and the work that many of you are doing. And it's helped inspire me. And I've learned from you. And we don't always get an opportunity to thank people individually. So let me just say this to all of you. Thank you very much for what you're doing, because this is that ripple effect. And we've got to be okay with it, knowing that we're impacting people that we'll never know. And we'll never get that chance to find out. But at least it would be a disservice if I didn't thank all of you, because we are truly all in this together. I might talk about some self-care stuff if we've got time. If not, no big deal either. But I want to answer any questions or comments that anyone has. Hey, Gary, I'll throw it over to you too if you've got some more follow-ups.
Yeah. So just a comment. Thank you, Jeff. A comment from Kathleen regarding psych autopsies, that so many overdoses are being labeled as suicide without a psych autopsy, and families are left wondering if their loved one died by suicide or accidental overdose. And I'm sure, you come across that often. So it wasn't a question as much of a comment, which I think is important to just sort of put out there for sure.
Yeah, and I'd say that's where, look, will the psych autopsy automatically explain that or answer it? Not necessarily. Can it most likely give more information or understanding of what was going on in that person's life? I'd say, yeah, when done the right way, absolutely. But also keep in mind who's asking for the psych autopsy. Because sometimes, like if it's an organization, it's not meant to necessarily be made public. And it's maybe certain versions of the reports aren't intended to be shared, because sometimes you get some information that is it hurtful to put it out there. And it is super delicate. And that's why realizing, well, okay, maybe we'll share this, but it's not intended to share it with these people. And the final report, what's the point of doing it, and who are we letting see it, and how are we distributing it to make sure it's not viewed by people that shouldn't be looking at it. Families absolutely can request it. And I know, like through AAS, quite often they're the ones that are asking for it to be done. And they're the ones that honestly are the ones paying for it. And then I say, cool, like that's your client. That's who the psych autopsy investigator, that's your client. That's who you're serving. And that's who you're doing it for. Yeah. I'll definitely share these PowerPoint slides. It makes me feel good. That means you like the slides that you saw. So of course I'll share them. Absolutely.
Yeah, we tend to post them on our website. There's an archive series, and anybody who registered, if you got there through the listserv, will let folks know when they're available, or you can contact me and I'll make sure that you get those. There's a question around resources for EMS specific to postvention. Jeff, I don't know if you have any thoughts or suggestions as it relates to resources in that specific workforce.
Yeah, so like with some of the EMS groups, and I know like in Australia, I've worked and helped out some people there. It's sort of like me being law enforcement background. It's sort of, again, taking that framework, but modifying it. Because like, for example, my understanding, like how policing will have like a roll call where before everybody turns out for patrol, they're all grouped together to get their assignment. So that's a good way to talk to them. EMS, from my understanding, a lot of times they don't have that, but they partner up in cars. So maybe you do that version of a talk multiple times throughout the day to visit them at a spot they're at. And that's the idea of modifying and adapting it. As far as specific research resources, a lot of the stuff, again, and I can share some of them with you, like that reporting on suicide, even though it says law enforcement at the top, I think it would be very helpful because it's that first responder family. And there are a lot of similarities to it. And it's that idea of the postvention. And this was the other thing too, which I'm glad they said that too. Everything can't, part of your postvention and then the long term, like that last, it all can't be suicide prevention. It can't. It gets repetitive. People don't want to hear it anymore. If you keep saying it over and over and over, you got to think of new and different novel ways of promoting this. But also this is where I remind us, this is like where resilience practices come in. And here's one I'll share with you, just as one very specific example, using EMS as an example, law enforcement, any one of you, no matter what you're involved in. At the end of the day, especially if it's a pretty heavy day for people, asking them like, hey, look, we've been through this. Today, we got through this, we're here. Acknowledge how tough it was. And if we're going to make time to acknowledge the bad that happened that day, what's only fair? If we also make time for the what? The good. Absolutely. That is only fair. That's what real resilience is. That's the neuroscience behind it, which is I'm trying so hard to take that neuroscience stuff and share in practical ways. How about you end the day going around, okay, well, what's one good thing that we got out of the day? And sometimes, yeah, it was awful death notification. At least I know I'm trained. And I was there to be able to get that notification, and instead of maybe somebody untrained and saying the wrong thing. So I guess something good out of it was I had the opportunity to be there and do that. And I guess I'm appreciative of that. That's real gratitude. This isn't soft, fluffy BS. No, this is the stuff that helps us get through the tough work we're doing. And imagine doing that a couple of times a week or other practices like that. That is the stuff where you rewire your brain to not get that negative thinking and just getting caught up in all the stuff that's wrong and not going right. That was a bit of a long answer, but hopefully somewhere in that was something EMS specific. I think there was.
Absolutely. So great comments too. Carrie put really looking at suicide prevention is including wellness. It can't be at the moment of, the crisis has hit the fan, so to speak. It's really got to take a look at way upstream.
Yeah, I'm just catching up on some of those comments too. I got to make sure I don't have my glasses on. I don't want to make that stupid, ugly, squinted face. I'm trying really hard not to do that. Don't laugh. That wasn't meant to be fun. No, I'm kidding. How about this? Because I know we only have a few minutes and we make time to do the things we want. How about everybody, and Garrett, if you can put that link one more time for the 5 days of awe. Here's a new program that I came up with some of the work that I'm doing at Columbia. And we had done that resilience symposium. It's the little things truly do add up. And everybody right now, think about a moment when you were in awe at any point in your life. Think about that moment and what it felt like. Think about it. Seriously, we're going to take some time, some moments of silence. Think about what it felt like, that moment of awe, and what you felt like. And I'm going to be quiet for 20 seconds. Now, how about this? What does it feel like now thinking about it? And why? And how important this is? Why? Because what kind of memory did you think of? What kind of thing? Something positive. And the research and the science and the data behind awe is so closely linked with resilience. But even I realize I can't keep talking about resilience all the time. So I've got, and I'm going to put it in there, Garrett, too, the direct link to this program, 5 days of awe. Maybe I'll come back later this year or next year and talk about this program. Literally, all you do is watch a video in the morning and evening, share a brief comment on it. It takes 5 to 10 minutes in the morning and evening for 5 days. It's all done through Google Classroom. Does it sound simple and too easy? It is. Let's not make things complicated. Let's make things simple. I invite you guys, give it a try. If it sounds interesting to you, why not? Hold on 1 second. I'm just typing this. And if not that, find something. Find something to look after yourself. Because again, I'm not going to repeat it. Well, I guess I am going to repeat it for the 4th time. It's something we deserve. If we are putting ourselves in tough situations in this world, in this practice, and this is part of our work, we've got to make sure we're finding those little moments. Let's make sure we're practicing what we preach. Any questions or comments? I'm just, if you want to look into it, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. There was a question from Ellen, just for officers seeking treatment, and if their firearms have been taken away, are they considered on limited duty and placed in a different position? I imagine that probably varies, but what's your...
It depends on the agency, but like terminology is whether they're limited or restricted each agency. Well, yeah, they are. If they don't have their firearm, they can't go out on patrol. And again, this is where I remind officers, your sole identity can't be your firearm or your badge or your shield. And realizing the best way to increase your chances of becoming full duty is getting the help you need and deserve, and being calm and patient with yourself. Because if you're calm and patient with others, make sure you're using that. Yep, here I use that term, that self-compassion for yourself. And that's hardcore resilience. That's hardcore self-care. And it's, again, why not? Why not be fair to yourself like you are to other people?
Self-care plan. Any experience on post-traumatic growth as it relates to this topic?
Well, yeah, very much. I talk about with post-traumatic growth, a couple of things. It's the idea of having practical resilience practices, but then also fighting that stigma of, if you need more help, get more help. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's how shattering that stigma too. But here's the other thing too. It's nobody's business. Nobody needs to know if you're getting help. Who cares? If you want to tell people, cool, good on you. But if you also want nobody knowing your business because you're a private person, that's fine too. It's that idea of get the help if you need it. In the context that I describe in law enforcement, if it's okay and normal to call for help on the street, like for backup, this is no different. But it is different in the sense that nobody needs to know in this case either. And get the help you need and deserve. And that's fine too. And it's that idea of, again, just be fair to yourself and allow yourself to be a work in progress as well.
I'm not seeing any other new questions popping up, so we'll just give it another minute for the good of the order. you know, as folks are thinking, any comments or any resources you want to share too, there's a wealth of wisdom and knowledge on the call today. So certainly if you have any resources that you'd like to share for folks, I would encourage you to pop it in the chat function. But in the meantime, Jeff, thank you so much. And we will certainly think about taking you up on an offer to come back in the future on other topics. I think the good news is people are hungry for this information, you know, and learning from other folks and learning from each other. We can't do this work on our own. So we really need to sort of continue, as you said, preach to the choir and expand the choir, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, and honestly, thank you so much. I don't know if you hear it enough too, what you and your team are doing. And this is where we talk about perspective. If this was in person, upstate or anywhere, I wouldn't have been able to come. I wouldn't be able to be an attendee. And this is where good stuff comes out of bad, absolutely. And we're not negating or minimizing the bad, no way. I see people are starting to sign off already, but I'm going to channel the professor teacher in me, and I'm giving everybody a homework assignment that I'm not following up on. So you do it if you want. If not, that's okay too. But here's my challenge. As awesome as awe is, it's not just going to the Grand Canyon, the Eiffel Tower, the Great Barrier Reef. There are daily moments of awe if you allow them to be. Just think and look differently. My homework to all of you is go out there today before you go to bed and find a small awe moment. Allow yourself that opportunity. And it's here's the thing. Don't look for it because you won't find it. Allow yourself open to finding it. And I'm not playing with words here, but there is a difference. Be open to it and you will find it. And why? Why not? Mix up your self-care plan. If you're still working on it, let this be the first thing you try today. And that's where I will stop, Gareth. Seriously, thank you so much. We're all on the same team, and I'm glad that you gave me this opportunity. And everybody else, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Be well, be safe, find your awe. Take care all.